Cool. Awesome. So, so yeah, basically what we are talking about today is preventing knee pain while hiking, which is probably, over the years of working with hikers, probably the number one concern. I've talked with so many hikers out there. It's such a common thing in the world of hiking. So many people struggle with it. And yeah, and today we're going to be diving into a bit of detail around how we can make a change on this, make the knees a bit more comfortable on the trail, and help us feel good. So basically, what we're going to be covering today, just to give you a little bit of rundown, and I'll say as well, as we kind of come through the chat, as usual, I'll take you through the presentation. If anyone has any questions as we go through about absolutely anything, just pop it in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I'll cover any questions or anything that anyone has. So essentially, what the plan of attack for today, what we are going to be covering, a few bits and pieces. Number one, why knee pain is so common, just to give a bit of clarity on that. Number two, why the typical solution to knee pain can sometimes fall a bit short, and why some of the information online can be a little bit not ideal for hikers. We're going to talk about three different areas of training which can be really, really useful for knee pain. I'm going to give you a few of my favorite exercise examples of kind of how this fits in, and a few extra tips to kind of round out this idea as well. There should be another bit where saying what we're not going to be covering, but I forgot to put that in, obviously. But basically, we're not going to be covering a full-blown training plan for this, because obviously that's a little bit beyond where we're going through. And we're not talking about people who are in the early stages of rehab. And essentially, this information, it's really designed for people who have mild knee pain on the trail or longer-term knee pain on the trail. If you've literally just fallen over and done something to your knee and it's all swollen up and it's really uncomfortable, um, talk with a physio. Go chat with them. This is more for the people who aren't in an early stage of rehab, aren't in the early stages out of surgery, but more sort of longer term knee pain. So before we go into it, I've talked through this a billion times before, so hopefully you already know who I am. One thing I do want to make clear though about what we're talking about today is essentially the context that we're talking about knee pain and hiking today. Is I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a physio, and I'm not talking through the context of a physio or physical therapist. What I am, and what the information we're talking about, is I am a return to performance specialist. So what that means is in the traditional rehab model, basically what happens is people have an issue, have pain, have an injury, whatever it may be. They go see a physio. They work with them for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. They get some exercises, get this and that, and they get them to a point. And the physio will then say, okay, you are released for normal exercise. You can kind of go out, do whatever you want, or whatever it may be. Now, tricky thing for in this situation is a lot of people will get released for normal exercise and they are absolutely fine with their normal day-to-day life. And they can go around, they can walk around, go to the groceries and this and that. They're pretty good. However, sometimes there can be a little bit of a gap between being released for normal exercise and being ready for day-to-day life and actually being ready for the demands of hiking. There is obviously a bit of a gap between those things where we have to go up and down stairs or hills or carry a pack or whatever it may be. So essentially my role and the context we're talking through today is we fit in this gap. We fill the gap between rehab and actually being ready for your time on the trail. And this information is really designed just for people, again, who aren't in those early stages of rehab, aren't in the early stages of surgery or whatever it may be, but they're looking to kind of move on and get ready for the trail. So keep that in mind as we come through. So, knee pain, as I said before, one of the most common issues I hear from hikers. For some, this may be a case of, they've got a big history of a knee injury. Maybe when they were younger, they got a knee reconstruction, they fell off a horse, they twisted their knee, they got run over by a dog. And, those are all literal examples I've heard this week already. It's only Monday. A lot of people may have a history of knee injury and they may know exactly where it's come from. For others, this may be a bit of a mystery. You may be like, well, I've never actually had a major injury, but on the trail, I do get a bit of pain. Like, where's that coming from? And it can be a bit of a frustration for a lot of people. But regardless of whether you know where this pain's coming from or whether it's just a bit of a mystery, it's pretty obvious it's one way that can really ruin both our confidence and our enjoyment for the trail, both for our everyday adventures, but also for people in this webinar. You probably have a big trip coming up. It can really, really stress us out. And if we're dealing with this pain when we're actually out on this trip that we've been dreaming about for so long, we've spent all this time and money and inclination to go out, and all of a sudden you're just struggling to get through the day with knee pain. It's not much fun. But the good news is, when it comes down to knee pain, it is almost always possible to make a positive change to knee pain with hiking with the right approach, and that's what we're going to be exploring today. So why knee pain is so common for hikers? A lot of people from the outside, they may look at hiking and be like, well, it's just walking, like, it should be fine on your knees. And unfortunately, a lot of physios may have that opinion, or personal trainers may have that opinion. But We know being on the trail, a little bit more than just walking. There are a few factors which really, really just do increase the risk of knee pain. Number one, descents. Every single step we take downhill puts a significant amount of extra stress through the knees. When we're steeper, it gets more. When we're longer descents, it's not like we're just going down a set of stairs, which takes us 30 seconds. We may be doing this for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, multiple hours at a time. It can be really stressful. Uneven terrain, hiking's very, very rarely flat, and all those little steps on slightly more even, uneven terrain can really add up over time. Fatigue, this is a big, big risk factor, both in the presentation, just pain appearing, but also the risk of you actually doing something and twisting your knee or whatever it may be. And obviously, long hours of hiking, if we are a bit fatigued, that can increase these risks. And there's often a bit of mismatch in regards to training, in the sense that a lot of people will do a lot of training and they'll go to the gym, they'll do HIIT classes, they'll do online classes online, maybe do a few exercises. But sometimes there's a little bit of difference between the training we're doing and what we actually need to do to get ready for the trail. And we may be improving our general fitness, our general strength, or whatever it may be. Sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch. Same thing when we're looking at health professionals, as I said before. Physios, if someone has knee pain, typically you'll go to knee pain, and I bet half the chat people on here gone through this, go to a physio, talk to a physio, they get given some squats, some glute bridges, some clams. Those are really, really common things. And that stuff can be good technically to get to a point. But again, there's a bit of a mismatch between doing a few clams and actually being ready for the trail. So there sometimes can be a bit of a mismatch here. Now, the typical solution for hikers, if you go online, you're like, hey, how do I get on top of knee pain? Go on a Facebook group, go online. Pretty much the most common thing is people say, hey, get a knee brace or just tape up your knee. You see all the time, it's the first recommendation a lot of people. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Using external support through a brace or taping up your knee can be a good way just to add some extra stability, add some extra comfort to the knee. Nothing wrong with this at all. But the issue with this, and I want to be really, really clear, if this is all you are doing, and if you get knee pain and you get a brace, and this is literally all you are doing, it is a bit of a mistake. And it's something that I really, really, really advocate not relying on. Because ultimately, when it comes down to braces and taping, if it's the only solution, it really is a band-aid solution at best. And the second you stop using it, probably it will come back. So if you're on the trail and your knee brace, the Velcro breaks or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm halfway through a trek and it's broken, it's not working, gets yourself into a little bit of trouble. Or if we're hiking on the weekends, we just forget it one weekend, all of a sudden we're in a bit of trouble. So I'm a big advocate for sort of, yes, use these things if you want. They can give relief, they can be useful, but we also want to take steps to actually help support the body and the knee, through our training. And that's what we're talking through today. And we're going to be diving into a few different areas of training that you can do. So with that being said, let's cover the first area, strength training. Number one, specific structured strength training is one of the single best things a hiker can do to help their knees on the trail. Pretty much every presentation I've done with the Camino Women, I've been talking about strength training. It just has so many benefits. When we're looking at pain and injury prevention, strength training, really, really significant. Essentially, by building up the supporting muscles and structures of the knees, we can do wonders for both reducing pain and discomfort on and off the trail, and also reducing the risk of you doing something which is going to be major to your knee as well. So if you have a slip, stumble, or fall, stronger supporting structures and muscles, less likely that's going to turn into something major. Now, one of the big mistakes, again, a lot of people see with knee pain and strength training is, again, you may go online, you may look at, hey, how do I get on top of the knees? And people will say, hey, you need to strengthen up your glutes, or you need to do a bunch of squats or a bunch of step ups and strengthen up the quads, or whatever it may be. And this isn't bad advice, but it's very, very rarely great advice, in the sense it is very, very, very rare that one muscle is causing the problem. This was a pretty common approach in regards to physiotherapists and this and that 10, 20 years ago, and a lot of people still do it, where they're like, you have an issue, there's one thing you need to work on, that will fix your issue. But it's very, very rare, it's that simple. Instead, if we really want to sort of get on top of the knees and we really want to give ourselves the best chance possible of making them comfortable, we want to ensure that all the supporting muscles of the knees are getting some attention. So not just getting tunnel vision and just being like glutes, 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 but really just thinking, okay, what muscles support the knee? How can I develop them? Now, when it comes down to what muscles support the knee, really, there's a bunch of muscles that go into it, but there's really four major muscles, and we want to keep top of mind when we're looking at training. Number one is your quadriceps. So front of the thighs, big muscles, four muscles in there. They do a lot of work on the trail, and they do a big, big, big role to help and support the knees. You might work through, I'll show you some exercise examples in a moment, but example exercise a lot of people will be familiar with, doing like step ups, squats. That typically works the quadriceps, and that can be good options. Number two is hamstrings. So hamstrings are the ones at the back of your thighs, a few different muscles in there. Very, very important for supporting these as well. Often get overlooked, but very, very important. Now you can work these through things like single-legged deadlifts or hamstring curls. Again, I'll show you some video examples in a moment, but some ideas there. Number three, your glutes, so the big bum muscles in there, very, very important for supporting the knee as well. You can do things like glute bridges or hip thrusts or mini band walks or whatever it may be. And then also number four are calves. So the lower muscles here, the calves, actually cross the knee joint, and they also do support the knees pretty significantly. So there are four big areas which are very, very significant for knee pain support. There's a few other muscle groups that do contribute, but they're really the four big areas. And as we can sort of see, hopefully already, sometimes if you go and say, hey, I'm going to do a bunch of glute exercises and just do a bunch of mini band walks or clams or glute bridges, or maybe just a bunch of squats, you can kind of see there may be a few gaps in regards to this. So we want to make sure we're ticking off each of these. Now, a few simple exercise examples for this to kind of give you visual and sort of stuff that may be useful. One, this is a great exercise I love for the quadriceps, which can be really, really relevant for hikers. It's called the assisted eccentric. Sorry if that music went off, that's always annoying. Yeah, this one is the assisted eccentric pistol squat. So this is a really, really relevant one for hikers because essentially it develops quadricep strength and in a really, really specific way of lowering yourself down, which is really, really common for people, obviously on steep steps or whatever it may be. Now, for this particular exercise, you start on one leg. You've got a couch, a chair, or whatever behind you. You've got two things for balance, like maybe a couple of trekking poles or broomsticks, whatever it may be. And essentially, all you're doing is lowering yourself really, really, really controlled all the way down. You get down the bottom, put 2 feet down, and pop up. Really, really great exercise. Very, very simple. Now, for this exercise, if you do it and you're like, hey, this is way too hard, super uncomfortable, I just can't control it, or whatever it may be, just use a higher box. You can make this as high as you need until you can control it 100%. And over time, you can kind of slowly make it a little bit lower, a little bit lower. But if you want to make this more difficult, you can use a lower box or even like wear a backpack or something like that. Very, very simple, but very effective. Now, an example of the glute exercise is the single leg glute bridge, which I'm sure most people would have seen, like you've done Pilates or yoga or something like that before. Very, very simple. Basically, one leg at a time, just pushing your hips up to the sky, squeezing the glutes. Does predominantly the glutes, a little bit of hamstrings as well. If you do this and you're like, oh, it's way too difficult, you can do 2 legs, both legs on the floor, do the same thing. Very straightforward. Next one is the assisted single leg deadlift. So this one works the hamstrings specifically, a little bit of glutes as well. This one, you're on one leg, holding on something for balance, and you're literally just tipping over the hips, up and down, up and down. You'll feel like the hamstring, the glutes are doing quite a bit of work. Also for hikers, really, really useful. Does a bit of ankle stability, does a bit of balance as well. So, it's a nice bang for your buck exercise there. And then finally, this is one for your calves. So I'm sure everyone has seen this in one way or another. Calf raises on a step, just going up and down and feeling the calves working there. You can do this with like shoes on or barefoot, doesn't really matter. If it feels a bit easy, you can load up a bit of weight. And I've got a backpack in this example. If it feels a bit difficult, you can use 2 legs. So they're just a few visual examples to kind of wrap your head around that. Um, and I will give you, like, I fully understand putting that into action, how's that go into place. You might be like, hey, how do I do that? I've got something for you in a moment, and which you can download, which will help you out with that. But I'll get there in a second. So that's number one. We got our strength training. Really, really useful, really, really significant for hikers, and not only for the knees, but also for so many other things for your hiking. Now, number two, when we're looking at knee pain for hiking, we want to think about mobility. Now, mobility is basically range of motion through the joints. Pretty much the same thing as flexibility, just how much range of motion you have through the joints. And this is something that often gets overlooked when we're talking about knee pain. Like sometimes people online will say, hey, go and do some stretches, go do some yoga, but it's very, very vague. And they're like, well, go do a 60-minute yoga class that might help your knees. Yeah, maybe, but we can probably do better than that. We can hone in with a few particular areas which can be pretty beneficial for a lot of people when it comes down to knee pain, specifically mobility. So I'm going to talk you through a bit of a what they call it. So I'm losing my mind at the end of the day. A bit of a framework. Let's say framework. It's not the right word, but a bit of a framework which we can use with this. To be clear, this framework, it's not gospel. It's not 100% right. It's not like the be all end all, but it's pretty good. And for our respects, just wrapping our head around this sort of concept, it's probably the best framework I have. If you went and talked to someone who's like, a super, super like in depth in the weeds of physiotherapy or personal training, that they might be like, oh, there's some nuance to this, but for our respects, it's good enough and it'll get the point across. So, but I just want to frame that. Now, How we start off with this is in the body, we typically have joints. Well, we have a bunch of joints, and most joints are either classified in one of two categories. We have what we call stable joints. And stable joints are essentially joints which don't want a huge amount of movement. They kind of have a role where they go back and forth, but we don't want a huge amount of movement through them. They want to kind of stay relatively stable, pretty locked in place. On the flip side of it, we also have joints which are known as mobile joints. Now, mobile joints are basically joints where we want to have lots of range of motion, and we want to have them freely moving around, not too restricted. So stable, mobile. Now, the knees specifically are what's known as a mobile joint. In the sense of the knees, they kind of want to flex and extend, just move forward or back, forward or back. They don't want a huge amount of movement in other areas. We don't want the knees falling in. We don't want the knees falling out. We don't want the knees twisting a huge amount. We kind of just want them flexing and extending. There will be a little bit of movement, but that's kind of what we want. Now, on the flip side of that, the joints below and above the knees, they are mobile joints, meaning the ankles and the hips above and below the knees, they typically want to have quite a bit of movement. They want to be pretty free. They want to move around pretty happily, and that's sort of what we want in the perfect world. Now, the tricky thing here is, and this is really, really common, if the ankles and or the hips get restricted or get tight, and this is really common from just day-to-day life, just sitting in a chair all day, our hips get super tight, or if you go wear heels or different footwear, or if you sprain your ankles a bunch of times, maybe the ankles will get tight, whatever it may be. If the ankles and the hips get restricted and tight, and you're going along on your hiking, and you're going up and up a hill or stepping off a rock or something like that, and the body's like, okay, in the perfect world, I would have nice and a lot of movement through the ankles and the hips. The ankles and the hips would move, they'd flex, they'd this and that to let me go through this movement. But the body tries to find movement, and let's say the ankles. And it's like, you know what, the ankles are way too tight. I actually can't do this comfortably. Then it's like, well, I need to find movement so I can actually get up this step. I need to do something. So what will happen, if it can't find the movement it wants in this mobile joint, it'll look at the joint above, in the knees, and allow more movement there. And essentially what will happen is there's just a little bit of compensation, and maybe the knee might start knocking in a little bit more to kind of get you up those steps or something like that. Now, by itself, this type of thing, it isn't the end of the world. If you have tight hips, you have tight ankles, by itself as an isolated factor, not the worst thing in the world. But if combined with other things like, hey, we're doing super long days on the trail, we're tired, or we don't have a huge amount of strength, or whatever it may be, it can be a contributor. So, long story short, essentially, ankles and hips, if they're tight, we want to mobilize them. Very, very straightforward. And doing a bit of target mobility work can help. Now, a couple of examples of this. This is a great stretch for the ankles, and it's called the knee to wall. I get most of my hikers doing this. Basically, what it involves is you just got one leg, next to a wall, keeping your heel on the floor, and you're literally just pushing your knee over your toes and touch the floor. When you hold it, you'll feel a bit of a stretch down the back of the calf here. And essentially, the idea behind it is just you're just pushing it, challenging it, get a bit of a stretch. Go forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. Pretty straightforward. If you do this and you give this one a go and you're like, oh, that doesn't feel amazing, maybe I do feel a bit of knee pain, you can do something else. You can literally go into YouTube and just type in ankle stretch or ankle mobility. A million videos will pop up, but realistically, anything in there will help. Now, on the hips, this is a great option. I really like this exercise for a lot of hikers, the modified world's greatest stretch. So this one will specifically target the front of the hips, also maybe a little bit of the mid back. So in this situation, you've got like one leg behind you, one foot up on the ground, and what we're doing is just reaching your arm through the gap and up to the sky. It's a little bit hard to kind of see and remember in this because there's a few little steps. But if you did want to look at this one, you can go into Google or YouTube and just type in modified world's greatest stretch. Again, a bunch of videos will pop up. Or obviously just check this replay and have a look. So there are a couple of super simple stretches in regards to mobility. Now, we talk about strength and mobility at this stage. I fully understand as you come through this. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, Rowan, you're making sense, but I saw this exercise. How's that going to a program? How does this work? How does this all sort of come together? And I fully understand that's a little bit much. So essentially, if you were in that boat and wanted a bit of direction on this, I've got a little free giveaway if you want to get your hands on it. Basically, I've got this thing called Hiker's Knee Prevention Guide, which is a free download and you can get your hands on, which essentially just gives you some extra ideas around strength and mobility to reduce knee pain while hiking. Essentially, in this guide, you get a few extra bits and pieces of information around knee pain, but probably more specific for you guys. You also get a free 12-week strength and mobility program to help your knees. So essentially, you can go into that program, you can check it out. There's strength workouts, there's mobility workouts, which will take you for 12 weeks, which can make a bit of a difference. If you did want to get your hands on that, all you're going to do is go to summerstrength.com.au/hikers-knee, plug in your email, you can check it out, and it will get delivered to your inbox. Plus, you get a bunch of lessons around knee pain as well. So that's summerstrength.com.au/hikers-knee. Now, to be really, really clear, This is great. This is a really good way to kind of visualize how this all goes into. But as with any type of pain, pre-made programs can only really take you so far. So, see how it's right. It's pretty basic. It's not obviously not personalized to you, but it may give you a bit of direction to go. So check that out. Hopefully that helps. Now, we talked about strength, we talked about mobility, let's talk about conditioning. Now, as we sort of said before, fatigue and exhaustion are risk factors when it comes down to knee pain on the trail. Now, ultimately, if you are exhausted, if you're kind of at the end of the rope on the day of a trail and you're dragging your feet and this and that, um, you are more likely to experience pain. That is just a risk factor for any pain. When we're tired, when we're fatigued, pain just happens for whatever it may be. On top of that, we also do have a higher increased risk of just something going wrong, of us just taking a misstep or an accident, slip, stumble, or fall, which can exacerbate things a little bit more. So fatigue, we kind of want to get on top of. Now, to combat this, if you haven't seen it, I did a whole webinar around reducing fatigue on the trail. So if you haven't checked that one out, definitely check the replay. But a few simple things here is like just doing some regular and consistent conditioning sessions in your week is a good idea. So conditioning is just a fancy way of saying cardiovascular sessions. So this might involve doing things like pack walking once or twice a week, going out and walking around the neighborhood with a pack. Or I might be doing some stair and hill climbing, like once a week, finding a set of stairs, going up and down a bunch of times. Might be hopping on a bike and just doing some cycling, some interval training, or realistically anything. But essentially, what we want to be doing is just make sure you are actively increasing your fitness. So when you're on the trail, ultimately the idea is we never get to that point where you're exhausted. And if you do have a history of knee pain, the ultimate goal is to kind of get you almost more fit than you need to be for the types of adventures you're doing, so you can control that as well as you can be. So a few ideas there. Now, on top of that, strength, mobility, conditioning, let's talk about a few extra bits and pieces. One thing that probably could be an entire presentation, I'm going to scoot over it very quickly, is load management. And load management is probably one of the most significant things you can do just to help with your knees on the trail. Realistically, there's a couple of big things just keep in mind. When you are planning out your training hiking, so if you've got your trip coming up, you've got a particular date, and you're planning out what hikes you're going to be doing, main thing you want to look at is just making sure you avoid big jumps up in your hiking distance or elevation. And essentially, this is called a spike in training load. And essentially, there's more load going through the knee than it's used to. It's surprised, it gets painful. Pretty common sense. So on that note, if you haven't watched, I can't remember the name of the presentation, but if you haven't watched it, it was like planning your hiking training or something like that. It was maybe the second one I did. Go and watch that. Or it's in one of the presentations, I can't remember. But check that out and make sure you're planning, putting a bit of tension around it. Number two is one thing I will sort of say as well is footwear. Now, a lot of people have strong opinions around footwear and hiking footwear and knee pain. And where a lot of people will say, hey, you should be wearing zero drop boots, hey, you should be wearing high top boots, zero drop shoes, high top boots, whatever it may be. Every type of footwear will have its own pros and cons. And I'm not going to be telling you, hey, you should wear this, you should wear that, because everyone's got their own preferences. But one thing you need to be aware of is when you're changing footwear. Because these days, putting on a new pair of boots, putting on a new pair of hiking shoes, you typically don't really need to break them in a huge amount. They're pretty good to go out in the store. But one thing we need to be aware of, even if we don't technically have to break in the boots a huge amount, our feet and our body and our knees take a little bit of adjustment. So if you are introducing new footwear, if you're going from a high top boot to a mid cut boot, or mid cut boot to a trail runner, or trail runner to a zero drop shoe, or whatever it may be, just ease yourself in. Give yourself a couple of weeks before you introduce it to your hiking. Give yourself a couple of weeks just wearing that stuff around the local neighborhood. Let the body kind of get used to things. Or if you're planning just jumping straight into your hiking, pull back your hiking for a week or two from what you're doing previously and ease yourself in. Because this introduction of new footwear, it'll get the muscles working slightly different, and this can be a spike in training load on those areas. So just be conscious of that if you're changing footwear. Other things, reduce fatigue. So nutrition, hydration, recovery. As I said, I did a whole presentation on that. So if you haven't seen that, please check it out because the more fatigue you can reduce, the better your hike's going to be, the less likely you're going to be getting a knee pain. Hiking poles, if you've got knee pain and you're not using trekking poles or hiking poles, do yourself a favor, go get them. They make such a massive difference, specifically on the downhills. As I said, downhill put a huge amount of extra pressure on the knees. When we're carrying a pack on our back, that puts even more pressure on our knees. Hiking poles can take a significant amount of force out of your knees on the downhills, plus reduce the likelihood if you have a slip, stumble, or fall. So very, very valuable. And then also, again, this could be a whole presentation, but I'll very briefly cover it, is getting exposure to triggers. What this means is if you are aware there is something that causes your knees to get uncomfortable on the trail, and you're like, you know what, that's really uncomfortable. one thing that we really, really, really valuable is slowly and steadily and conservatively expose your knees to those types of things that are causing your pain so it can slowly get used to things. So what I mean by this is let's use the downhills as an example. Common trigger for knee pain. A lot of people downhills get a lot of pain. Trying to practice this on your hiking may not be so much fun. If you're going out and doing hikes with lots of up and down, may just be a bit too much for you. However, most people can probably find a set of stairs or a set of hills and just do a little bit of practice going up and down, up and down. So you can expose the knee to that type of stress. And essentially, we want to do this in a way that doesn't cause you pain. So if you do 10 minutes of it and then your knee starts talking to you and you're like, oh, you know what, should I keep on going or not? That means stop, call it a day, and then next week go back and do 10 minutes again. And if you do it pain free, then next week go and do it again, do it 11 minutes or 12 minutes or 13 minutes. And essentially, we just want to sort of expose it very, very gradually to that type of thing. And this could be really, really useful. Kind of like the again, lose my words, analogy, I don't know. The thing that I like to compare this to is like a hot bath, in the sense of like, when we go into a hot bath, first time we stick our toe in, it's stinking hot. We're like, oh my gosh, that's super uncomfortable. But then we dip our toe in again, and it's like, oh, it's a little bit better this time. Then we dip our toe in again, it's a little bit better again. And that's what we're doing with this type of thing. It's like exposure therapy. You're slowly exposing the knees to these triggers so we can get a little bit happier with it. Again, I could do a massive presentation. And how we doing for time? Boom, right on time. This is great. Cool. So last little bit, I know I've covered a lot, so I don't know I've zipped through this because I just wanted to make sure I got through it all before I had to duck off and give time for questions. I know that's a lot of information. So obviously you'll be able to check this replay out and sort of go over it a couple of times if you need. As I said, you can kind of check out that hiker's knee prevention guide, download that for free. We'll give you a little bit of idea. But I fully understand, obviously, pain and training, bit of a complicated subject. Sometimes it can be a little bit tough to kind of put this all into action for yourself. So if you were in the situation where you're like, yo, got a trip coming up, got this knee, give me a bit of trouble. I kind of just want some help with this and also just get ready for this trip. As I always say on these calls, this is something we can potentially help you with. We do online personal training for hikers specifically, and a lot of hikers who struggle with knee pain as well. Now, typically what our packages includes is we will create a custom and personalized workout plan, which will cover, get you ready for anything that trail will be ready, will throw at you. So covering things like strength training, cardio, hiking training, and recovery mobility, making sure it's all planned out in a way that's personalized for you, your situation, your life, and your needs. Now, on top of that, we also do put a big emphasis into education. So I've kind of zipped through things very, very quickly today. But as you can probably see, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the whole idea of pain prevention. It's a little bit more complicated than, hey, just go fix one muscle. There's a bit more that goes into it. So we do put a big emphasis into education around all the peripheral factors which affect your knees and your hiking. So things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, a bunch of other stuff. And we also make sure you do have a coach in your corner as well to give you the coaching, support, and accountability, kind of keep you on track as you kind of come through. Now, if you were interested in learning a little bit more about that, all you need to do is just go to summerstrength.com.au/online. Now, on there's a big video you can kind of watch. It tells a bit about our programs. Or if you just want to have a chat just straight off the bat, there's a link on that page. You can book a chat with our team. We can sit down, just talk about you, your situation, your needs, and all of that. And yeah, just ultimately see if it's something we might be able to help you with. And if it is, then we can talk you through how we might do that and all of that. So if you want to learn a little bit more, go to summerstrength.com.au/line and you can take it from there. So with that being said, I've kind of zipped through everything there very, very quickly. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Hopefully people get a bit of value out of that. So if you do have any questions or any of the stuff I just covered, or literally any other questions about your training for hiking, we do have a bit of time now because I zipped through that very, very quickly. So just plug it in the chat and I'll do my best to answer. So what should hikers focus on for treks with steep, unstable, and slippery descents? So yeah, this is a whole presentation. That is a little bit tricky one. But realistically, when we're looking at steep, unstable, slippery descents. So number one, trekking poles, make sure you're using them like absolutely. Number two, realistically, the same muscle groups we talked about today are pretty much the same things we typically work with when we're looking at those types of descents. in the sense that we want to make sure the quads are super, super strong. We want to make sure the hamstrings are super, super strong. We want to make sure the glutes are super, super strong, and also the calves are super, super strong. They all play a big, big role in the descents as well, even if you haven't got any issues with knee pain at all. So ticking off those things, really, really good point. One thing you can sort of dive into a little bit, and I'll just share my screen in a second, um, is one thing that a lot of people do struggle with when we're looking at sleep, slippery descents. Um, so I'm trying to speak and type at the same time. I just wrote in what I was typing, which didn't really help. Wrote in what I was saying. One thing you can sort of look at with a steep and slippery descents is a lot of people really struggle with that sort of thing where you take a step and say you're on mud or say you're on screen or say you're on something and you take a step and your foot just slides like a centimeter or two. You do that once, not a big deal. You do that 10 times, not a big deal. You do that 100 times, all of a sudden the backs of your legs are cramping up, you're getting really sore, and even your knees are getting sore. And I had this for myself on when I went and did Kokoda a few years ago. And we were hiking the mud, lots of descents. Literally in the first day or two, like every single step I took, step, slide, step, slide, step, slide. And halfway through day two, I was like, oh my gosh, my knees get really sore. And I was like, I've done all this training. This is my job. Like, why is my knee getting sore? This is crazy. Um, and then basically by the end of the day, I realized, look, it's not my knee. It was just my calf was like in cramp because it was doing so much work just stabilizing myself. So long story short, if you are looking at slippery descents, you can do something like this, which can be really, really useful. And basically you can do like this type of hamstring curl with like sliders. You can buy them like in Kmart for like $5. If you're at home, you can use like a magazine on like carpet or a towel on hardwood floor. And the idea behind this is basically we're just doing a really, really slow, controlled push out. So similar to when I was demonstrating that eccentric box pistol squat in the other video where we're slowly lowering. This is similar, but working the hamstrings and a bit of the calves. So you might do something like this where we're just really, really concentrating on lowering and then coming up. Now, realistically, this is a bit of a tough exercise, but you can do that. You can also do this on a Swiss ball, or even if you're in a gym, you can use like a hamstring curl machine, and this can be a nice addition into that type of thing. If you are specifically struggling with those slippery descents, it can go a long way. Um, Cool. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Um, any other questions, guys? Fire away while we're here. Cool. Well, that might be it then, if there's no other particular questions. So let me just double check. Yeah, I can't remember what the next presentation is, Olivia. I was just looking at my calendar. I'm not sure, so I'll have to confirm that. But for everyone who's been here tonight, I really do hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hope you got some ideas from it. I hope it gave you a little bit of insight. As I said, I've kind of zipped through like a lot of stuff today, so I fully understand if it's a little bit if you have any questions, feel free to reach out or get your hands on that free guide. And feel free to flick me an email if anyone does have any questions. But thank you for turning up on your Monday evening. I really, really appreciate it, everyone. So yeah, that'll probably do it. So hope everyone has a lovely, lovely evening, and we'll talk to you next month. Awesome. Take it easy, guys.
Rowan, see you guys.